Welcome back, everyone. In this video, our goals are to discuss what foliage details are, to learn how to access and edit foliage details, and then lastly, to discuss and demo foliage paint settings. So firstly, what are foliage details? Well, foliage details are modifiable properties specific to each foliage type in your foliage type list, that is this list over here, that are accessible to you. Now, these settings determine the rules for a mesh when it's applied to the world. And some things that you can set include the density of that foliage type when it's applied to your world, the size of that foliage type when it's applied to your world, the angle of placement when that foliage type is applied to your world, the culling distance, and a lot more. So, next, how do we access or edit these foliage details? Well, there's a couple places to do this. Number one is to find your foliage type asset in your content browser, and currently ours are in the content landscape foliage types folders. Here are my 5, and we can simply double click on any of these foliage types to open them up. So I'm going to open up my foliage type bush here. So you can see a bunch of different details that we'll be covering here in the next few videos about our foliage type. That's way number 1. Way number 2, jumping back to our main level here, is to simply select a foliage type in our foliage list. So currently, let me just peel back my content browser here a little bit. Currently, I've got my bush selected here, and I've selected on FT bush. It is highlighted. So now I can see some foliage details associated with our foliage bush. And if you look very carefully, a lot of the same settings here, selecting our foliage type bush in this details, are the same as our details here. We've got some placement settings, some instance settings, similar to placement settings, instance settings, etc. However, you'll notice that when you select your foliage type here within the foliage mode, we've got access to some painting settings. We do not have access to these painting settings here when you select on the foliage type directly. As you can see, there's no painting settings in here. Now, the focus of this video is on those paint settings, so we're not going to be working in here too much. We're going to be working back in our foliage list. So let me just peel this back. And again, we're going to be focusing on these painting group of settings right here with our FT bush selected. Now, one thing that is worth noting here is you can hide or show these details here with this button right here. You've got this little tooltip that says hide details for our selected foliage type. So if you click on that, it'll hide them. If you want to bring them back, show them. I rarely ever hide them. I keep them shown most of the time, but that's a good little handy trick to know. Okay, let's discuss and demonstrate some of these foliage paint settings. And again, I'm going to be doing this with the bush. If you'd like to choose a different foliage type, that is going to be up to you. Firstly, we've got under our paint settings here this density over, sorry, let me just move this over to the side right here. Density /1KUU. This is our foliage instances placed per click in a 1000 by 1000 Unreal unit area. Now, this does get modified by our paint density setting. So this is a density setting for placing bushes, but we've also got this paint density setting. So in a way, you've kind of got two places to modify your density when you're clicking here in your level. You've got your paint density that works in tandem with your density setting right here per foliage type. Let's play with this a little bit. I'm going to set my paint density setting up here to be 1. And it says, actually, as we highlight over this, that this acts as a multiplier for our individual foliage types density specifier. So this is currently set to 1, and I'm going to set my density down here for our bush to 5. I'm also going to have my brush size here. Let's set that not to 2,000. Let's set that to 1,000. And now let me zoom on up. I'm going to place this on my some snow here because, again, my grass over here, I've got some grass type in the material that's populating that automatically with some foliage. So I'm going to be painting this onto a snowy surface here in my landscape base. So just one click right here, and you can see how many bushes that has applied. I'm just going to do Control Z right here. That is with paint density of 1 and a density 1K UU of 5. Now let me set this to 100. And now if I click, you can see how there are many more bushes. So density, that works in tandem with paint density to determine how much of that given selected foliage type you paint in your level. Now again, I could do Control plus Z to undo this, or with erase density of 0, I can hold down the Shift key and left click to erase my selected foliage type. All right, next, let's talk about our radius here. This is the minimum distance between foliage instances. So with my settings here in my paint tab, the same as 1000 for brush size and 1 for paint density, I'm going to set my radius here. Let's try a radius of 500. Now, when I click in my level, just one click, you can see that they're all pretty evenly spaced. And the reason for that is because there is a minimum of 500 Unreal units in between each bush. Just going to do Control Z to undo that quickly. If I was to set this to something like 50 and click, you can see it's guaranteed that there's 50 Unreal units between each of those, meaning they can cluster together much more closely. So that's good to know about. Next, let's go to our scaling setting down here. We've got a few different options. We'll come back to this single instance mode override in just a little bit. But with our scaling, you've got a few different options. You've got uniform, you've got free, and you've got different lock options. So let's explore uniform first. With uniform, all axes are uniformly scaled according to a randomized min and max value. So let's set our min value to be, we'll say 0.5, and our max value to be, say, 3. And I'm going to set our radius here. Let's go back to something like 250, right? Something like that. Let me click here. And so now you can see we've got some random sizes to our bushes. Some are small, some are big, but they're all proportionately scaled. They're uniformly scaled. In this case, this bush right here might be uniformly scaled as to a 0.5 scaling, and maybe this bigger bush is uniformly scaled to be 3.0. They're somewhere in between 0.5 and 3. All right, let's Control Z and undo that quickly. Now let's go to scaling the free setting. This is going to expose X, Y, and Z min and max scales. So free allows you to set a range for X, Y, and Z independently. Min max values, again, can be selected per instance. So for example, let's try an X min of 0.5, a max of 3. Let's do the same for the Y scale, 0.5 and 3. And let's try for scale Z, 0.5 and a max of 3. So now when I place this in my level, you can see that they're not uniformly scaled. It's going to pick a random min and max scale value for the X. It's going to pick a random min and max of scale for the Y and for the Z. So they're not uniformly scaled, but they can be stretched and squished all kinds of weird ways. For example, this bush that you see right in front of you right here, that might have picked a Z scale of 3. It might have picked a Y scale of, say, 1, and it might have picked an X scale of, say, 0.7. And that's how it's scaled all of these different bushes. All right, let me just do Control Z to undo that. Lastly, for our scaling options here, we've got different lock options. Now, lock ensures that the min and max values are locked on some axis. The free axis can have range, though. So what that means is if I say lock X, Y, and I set my scale X to be, say, a size of 2 for the min and the max. Scale Y, that's going to be 0.5 and 0.5. However, my scale Z is going to be 0.5 to 3. Now if I click, it's going to ensure that my scale X and scale Y is the same. However, my Z scale can be different between the 0.5 and 3. It's locked in 2 axes, but randomized in my free axis. Now, last but not least, under our painting settings here, we've got these new settings called Single Instance Mode Override Radius and Single Instance Mode Radius. Of course, this one is grayed out and it doesn't become active until we check this box for Single Instance Mode Override Radius. Now, really, these only come into effect if we are in single instance mode. So with my bush here selected, I'm going to kick it into single instance mode. And all selected here is fine, meaning it will do a single instance of everything selected. Currently, we just have our bush selected. And with this single instance mode override radius checked, we can then specify a radius. Now, I'm going to punch in 500 here. And you're going to notice a green bubble now appearing out in my landscape. Note too that I've also got my scaling switched back to uniform, and my scale is on a minimum of 0.5 and a maximum of 3. And what happens now with a radius there of 500 is if I click one time, you're going to see a bush appear right in the middle. And if I try to place another one, say right about here, and I'm currently trying to left click, nothing is happening. And that's because this radius is overlapping this bush, and it recognized, hey, you've already got one there. However, if I was to go just outside of that radius and left click, another bush would appear at a different random scaling. So what this does is kind of a protective bubble of sorts to ensure that you're not placing single instances of a given mesh too close to one another. It is preventing you from placing them too closely. So again here, I've got one right there. If I was to try to left click here, can't do it. However, if I go just outside of that radius, if I left click here, one does appear. So there you have it, guys. These are your paint settings with your paint tool. That is going to do it all for this one. We will see you in the next one.